Hey, what's going on guys, it's FPL Yusuf and welcome back to another video here on my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be going into my updated draft just as we start to prepare for that game week 1 deadline. We're only a couple of days out now, and over this last weekend of preseason games my team has changed dramatically. One big player has come out, we've got a few others to come in, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Okay, welcome back guys. Thank you so much for joining me today here on my YouTube channel. If you are new around here, and just before we jump into this video, if you wouldn't mind dropping a thumbs up and subscribing down below, it would be very much appreciated. So, as I said in the intro, this weekend my team has took a dramatic change from where I thought it was going to be. I've had a lot of different transfers which have come in and out, and to be honest with you, this pre-season here has probably been the most stressful one I've played in all my years of doing FPL. Like, I've been playing this game since 2009 and never have I known a pre-season to be as confusing, as conflicting, and basically just as things changing so frequently before the run up to a deadline. I feel like usually by now you've got a core 7-8 players who are guaranteed without hesitation in your team. Now I think maybe I could say maybe there's only 3 or 4 that like have actually stayed throughout this whole time of like sort of building drafts, building my teams, and it keeps changing day by day. So today we're going to go through my last final team. I think this team here will probably be a good 70% of what is going to be my final team. I won't put any more videos up this week up until either Thursday evening or Friday morning, where I do a final team selection where you guys will see the exact team that I'm going to go into game week 1 with. So let's just jump straight into what we've got. Okay, first up, goalkeeper picks. Now I've gone for a 4.5 and a 4 million. And the reason why is to spread the budget. I have to say before I get into the goalkeepers, I don't like any of them. I don't like any of the 4.5s. Even the 5s, to be honest with you. In my head, in an ideal world, I want to go with either a Raya or an Alisson as a 5.5. I want a premium who's just going to be in there, set and forget. But as you guys can see from that, the fact that I haven't got 0.5 in the bank, there is literally no money to do it. So I've had to go with Dean Henderson. The counterparts around the 4.5 million, I don't like them. Flecken has not looked good in preseason to me. Brentford defensively haven't looked good. Areola at West Ham, they've improved. Obviously, Todibo is signed for them. It looks like they're going to get hold of Wan-Bissaka as well. So maybe, maybe in the next couple of weeks, you might see a little bit more solidity from West Ham. But their initial opening fixtures don't really fill me with too much joy either. Chelsea is just a straight up no-go. 1, because they have not looked good in pre-season defensively at all, but 2, they've got so many goalkeepers, it's so hard to tell. So for me, Dean Henderson is kind of like the best of a bad bunch. I don't want to be too harsh, but like I said, for me personally, if I had a little bit more money, I would try, and maybe that's one thing that I do try to make before the deadline, is trying to push him up somehow to get to a 5.5, either Ray or Alisson. I just feel I would just feel a lot more comfortable with them in goal as opposed to the 4.5s this year. So yeah, for me, Henderson's going to be in there for now, but that could be subject to change by the time we get to the deadline. Now onto the defence. I've got a few premiums in here and a few cheap ones as well, so we've kind of got a different mixture of range. We'll start with Trent first. I won't go too much detail into him because I've kind of spoken about him, Gavardio too, over the last few videos. But Trent, for me, started the game against Sevilla on Sunday for Liverpool in their pre-season match. Did pick up an assist, was playing very well. He went off, they conceded, so it's showing positive signs. I think the one thing for me was just seeing, was he going to get on the pitch. I think the fact that he did play, he played over an hour, there should be no doubt that he's going to be starting game week 1, and that was all I needed to know, whether or not I got him or not. So Trent has to be there. Guardiola, same thing. City didn't look too great in the Community Shield, but I'm not really going to judge that too much. Obviously Chelsea up first, and then they've got Ipswich in at game week 2. So for me, Gavardio, even coming at the price point that he is, I think he's just that better. Even though he's 0.5 more than the rest of the City defenders, I think you're just going to get more attacking threat from him. I think you'll get guaranteed minutes of start as well, which for a City player is kind of a big thing sometimes. So yeah, for me, Gavardio and Trent, we've spoken a lot about them, so I won't really go too much into them. Now, Saliba is an interesting one. So prior to yesterday, which I'm recording this video on Monday afternoon, so prior to Sunday, before Arsenal kicks off against Lyon, I actually didn't have any Arsenal defenders in my team, and it was making me very uncomfortable. Now, I've been priced out by a lot of them. Raya was the closest thing to getting into that, but Lyon, Arsenal won 2-0. They looked so comfortable. Defensively just looked like where they left off last season. But the most important thing is both Gabriel and Saliba yet again scoring from corners, and it's just, if there was any sign for me to not go without one of them, yesterday was that. It just showed me once again that it's not just the defensive side of things that they offer. Arsenal are so good at set pieces, in particular corners, and maybe that's a shout for Declan Rice. We'll get onto him when we move into the midfield, but yeah, for me, I couldn't. I was already uncomfortable without not going with an Arsenal defender before yesterday, and after seeing them keep a clean sheet and both the centre backs scoring again, for me, one of them had to be there. There was a contemplation in my mind of getting both of them. If Arsenal's opening fixtures were a little bit better, maybe I would consider it. And you know, I think that's one thing that you're gonna hear me talk about throughout this video is, do you go for a player for their fixtures or a player for their team? And what I mean by that is, I think throughout a lot of this preseason, and in particular around the sort of cheaper picks, a lot of them have got a good fixture run, but they are A, worse players, but B, playing on worse teams. Now, I think sometimes, especially in the case of Arsenal and Arsenal's defence, is that we may be overlooking them a little bit because, you know, they've got Aston Villa away, Spurs away, City away in the first three. Maybe not City, but I could see Arsenal keeping a clean sheet against Aston Villa and Spurs. Both of them have not looked amazing in pre-season. More so Aston Villa just haven't looked like themselves at all. Spurs, on the other hand, you know, they've looked good going forward, but defensively not at all. So, you know, you could see Arsenal win them type of games. And I think that's one thing that I learned from last season is I took the fixtures, even if it meant going for a worse player, than maybe relying on someone who's playing for a better club, who is a better player, but maybe doesn't have as good fixtures. The more consistent player, the one who's been there, done it, the one who's playing for the bigger clubs, usually will come out on top. So just err on the mind of caution with that, is that I think sometimes we overlook, you know, these type of players because we see a 4.5 with great fixtures or a 5 million midfielder with great fixtures. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to outscore, you know, the 6 million Saliba, the, you know, 7-8 million midfielders. It doesn't always mean that just because they've got good fixtures that it's going to equate to points. I think that's one thing that Arsenal showed me over the weekend, is that no matter who they're playing against, they're going to control the game for most part. I think City will be the one that gives them a real test, maybe Liverpool too, but Arsenal are always in contention to keep a clean sheet against anybody because they are genuinely that good. So yeah, for me, Saliba, I had to find a way to get him in there, but I still am, at the time of recording, contemplating going with a double Arsenal defence, but we'll talk more about that at the end of the video when I show you possible transfers for this team too. Okay, moving on to the midfield, and I'm going to carry on with the theme of Arsenal. Now, ideally, I would love to have Bukayo Saka in this team, but the problem with him is, when I had Saka over Odegaard, I couldn't afford to get Eze, and Eze was actually Jacob Murphy. Now, again, I'm going to cover this part at the end of the video when I go into my potential transfers, but the midfield just looked too weak by having Bukayo Saka in there. And the one thing with this team in particular is when you get to game week 5, and that's one thing that I'm looking at when building this squad, is a long-term view. I want to have a team that I don't have to make as many transfers for the first sort of 3-4 game weeks. So when I get to game week 5, game week 6, where maybe certain teams have a little bit of a fixture swing, I've got transfers stashed in the bank that I can make those changes without taking a points hit. Now, game week 5, Arsenal play Man City and Spurs play Newcastle. And as you can see, I've got Newcastle players, I've got Arsenal players, I've got Man City players. So for me, it wasn't ideal. But Odegaard is in here. One, because I actually think he's going to have a very good season for Arsenal. But two, it was just to save that budget on Saka. But as I said, at the time of recording, that is still subject to change because I don't like the idea of not going without Bukayo Saka. So we'll see on that one. That brings us nicely on to Eze. Now, Eze, as I said, was the other player who was a part of this little transfer saga. It was either him or Jacob Murphy. Now, for me, I was a little bit uncertain about Eze throughout this whole preseason. You know, a lot of people have been hyping him up. He's owned by quite a large percentage. I think he's at about 33-34% owned at the time of recording. So he was owned by a fair chunk of the game. And I always have this thing where when too many people jump on something, maybe it's a little bit of superstition, maybe it's a little bit of the thinking of that it could be jinxed. I don't usually like to swerve that way. However, watching Crystal Palace play against Nantes in their last preseason game, Kamada did get the goal, but Eze was on fire. You know, he was getting the shots away. I think when Mateta comes back, he will just elevate his game. He's probably on penalties, set pieces too. I think the pros for Eze just outweigh the cons. Even though, like I said, I don't like owning players who are necessarily super owned. I think especially around his price bracket, there is no one else that kind of compares with him. I think I've touched on this in a previous video where I said Trent would be the only one that maybe I look at replacing for a £7 million midfielder. Obviously, I already got Trent in here, so for me, it was either you go for Eze or maybe, you know, there's a possibility of Nkunku maybe save 0.5 million there, but I just think Crystal Palace are a better outfit right now than Chelsea are. And for me, Eze at the time of recording, like I said, because of the Saka transfer, was the next best thing for me to bring into this team. Okay, so on to a little bit of a differential now, and that is Oscar Bob. Now, bear in mind, for anyone out there who's looking at him, he's currently only owned by 2% of the game. I don't know how much I expect him to go up before we get to the deadline. The reason why I've got him in here is for two things. Number one, he's a budget enabler. That's the first and most important thing. Let me just specify that. But two, I'm taking a gamble knowing full well that there is a chance that he could be benched at any moment. he might not even guarantee a start at game week 1. Me personally, I do think he will start game week 1. What I was hearing is that Foden and Bernardo Silva were going to compete in the middle with Kevin De Bruyne for those 2 centre mid spots. So between 3 of them, 2 of them were going to start. The left-hand side was going to be between Grealish and Doku, and the right-hand side was going to be between Bob and Salvio. Now, whether that's true or not is a different question, but if it is true, Oscar Bob's got 5 returns in pre-season so far from 4 games. So he's been good. He was very good in the Community Shield. Probably one of City's bright sparks. Got the assist for the Bernardo Silva goal. Practically played 90 minutes. I think he got subbed off in the 89th. So for me personally, I'm expecting him to start game week 1. Obviously, I've got him in there for the Ipswich game in game week 2, which is when I do want him. But like I said, if you are going for someone like this, I think you have to bear on the side of caution that he may just get rotated out at any given moment, and you may end up having to bring someone off from the bench. Now, I didn't really cover Gvardiol in the first part of the video, but that is my guy to rotate with, like Lewis Hall. So yeah, I've got cover there for 2 good defenders if worst case comes to worst and he doesn't play. But he is in there as a little bit of a gamble, but one that I am, for me personally, just willing to take at the start of this season. And finally, my other midfielder is Diogo Jota. Now, this was where the big switch-up came from. Jota started that game against Sevilla as the number 9, which is what I was waiting to see. Obviously, Darwin and Gakpo are both back with the squad now. I just kind of wanted to see how Liverpool would line up. And I think the team we saw in the first friendly they played will pretty much be the starting 11 for their first game against Ipswich. Now, Salah was kind of pushed quite far out wide. He wasn't really affecting the game as much. And this is always my biggest worry with Salah. We saw it at times last season where he's almost hugging the touchline. And when he's out there, he's not worth it. He's not worth 12.5 because he's just not getting involved in the game. It's when Salah comes inwards, that's when he becomes a threat. Now, don't get me wrong, look, he's on penalty, so he's always got that route to point. I just think for me, Jota, goal and an assist, could add 2 goals if Salah had squared in the ball, ironically. And I just think for me, it was just enough to say, you know what, the difference in price between them both, it would just benefit my team so much more by spreading that money elsewhere. So yeah, for me, I think that's one thing that I can say for certain is that I am going to be going with Diogo Jota as in my game week 1 team. Again, I think you have to err on the side of caution, same way with a little bit as Oscar Bob, where Darwin's there, Gakpo is there. There could be rotation at any point. I think that's one thing you have to accept with Diogo Jota. I do expect him to start game week 1. I think of all the fixtures that they've got, that's probably the one you want him to play is the Ipswich game. So yeah, just err on the side of caution with that. And the last midfielder on this is obviously just Harry Winks. He's in there just as a budget enabler, so we won't go into him on that. Now, the front 3, 2 out of the 3, we've spoken so much about this pre-season, so I'm not even going to go into him. It's Erling Haaland, it's Alexander Isak. Without Salah, these 2 are probably 2 out of 3 captaincy choices. Isak, Salah, and maybe Jota as well. The other striker that I want to get onto is Kai Havertz. Now, this is where my budget scenario has caused me problems. Now, I could easily move Odegaard back to Saka by downgrading Havertz to a Muniz or maybe even a João Pedro. I'm not 100% sure on Brighton at the moment. João Pedro obviously coming up against Everton first game. I think a lot of us were kind of surprised when we saw him back in, because I think the idea was he going to be fit and available for game week 1? There is a saving there to be made if I downgraded Kai Havertz, but for me, there's just something in me that just wants to own Havertz at the start of this season. I know Arsenal's fixtures are a little bit mixed, but me personally, as an Arsenal fan as well, I do believe Havertz will start as the number 9. Even if he gets moved out of that number 9 for Jesus, I think what would end up happening is Partey would come off, Rice would drop back to the 6, and Havertz would move into the 8. So I think minute security-wise, I think Havertz is pretty much set to go. There's just something in me I've just got a good feeling about Havertz at the start of the season. And usually, one thing that I always say is, when you're picking FPL, you can have as much data in front of you as you want. You can have as much eye test as you want. But sometimes you just got to go with your gut feeling. And for me, I could be wrong. But there's just a thing about Havertz that I've got at the moment. And this is kind of the reason why Saka wasn't in my team, because I had to break it up to get Havertz in there. Now, I could get Saka back in quite easily and keep Havertz, but that would mean downgrading Saliba, which again, I'm still not 100% certain on. But for me, as that third striker spot, it was Rodrigo Muniz for so long. And don't get me wrong, it could switch back there. But as of right now, I've just got a feeling about Havertz, and he's just someone that I want to make sure is in my game week 1 team. And for the few game weeks after, I know they've got Villa, then they've got Brighton, then they've got Spurs. So tricky games, but I do think Havertz could have a good start to the season. And I'm like sort of 90% sure that he is going to be one of my 3 strikers who are starting the season. Okay, on to my potential transfers now. I will just put some on screen. As I said, I haven't spoken about in the midfield bit that there is a possibility that I go from Odegaard up to Saka and downgrade Eze to Jacob Murphy. Now, Jacob Murphy is an interesting one because he, out of everyone in the Premier League, has probably had the best pre-season. 7 goal involvements. He's been exceptional value. Now, I think with him, I don't expect him to play 90 minutes. I think you're always going to get anywhere between 60 and 70. usually he does his, if he's going to score, he'll usually do it before he gets subbed off, which is always a good thing. I just, for me personally, I think the overall team looks worse with Jacob Murphy in there versus with Eze. I think Eze and Odegaard versus Saka and Murphy, I think Odegaard and Eze will outscore them. Obviously, as an Arsenal fan, I do want Bukayo Saka in there. One, because he's on penalties, but two, because I know how influential he is to Arsenal. So if there is a way that I can do that by maybe scrimping somewhere else, or maybe I decide that Saliba has to be dropped. I'm not sure. Konsa's in at 4.5, so maybe that's a way to cover it. I'm not sure at this moment in time. But right now, that is probably if there's going to be any transfers to this team, this is certainly going to be one part of it, and that's Saka coming back in, and maybe, like I said, Eze is unfortunately going to have to drop down. The other transfers that I'm looking at, as I just touched on there, is Jarell Konsa coming in at 4.5 from Liverpool. Now, for me, at 4.5 for a team who's ranked second on FDR is incredible. Now, how long will he continue to start for? Will he continue to start is the question. Now, like I said, Liverpool's first game, he did start alongside Van Dijk, and I can only assume that is going to be their starting 11. However, again, the same way as I touched on about other players throughout this video, it wouldn't be the biggest surprise in the world if he sort of chopped and changed depending on what game they were playing, what situation they were in. Konate is obviously a very good player, so there's still obviously a chance that he could be rotated out. But I think it was just positive to see that Konsa started that first game where you had the likes of Salah playing, Van Dijk, Trent, Alisson, all their big players were starting. So, like I said, at 4.5 million, I think he's definitely someone to consider. It's a very cheap way into the Liverpool defence. I don't know whether I would consider him over Trent. I think Trent's attacking returns more than makes up for that price you're going to save. But I think for me personally, that's someone that maybe I could look to downgrade in Saliba to, and then again boosting Odegaard up to Saka. It's a possibility, but I think the one thing that I'm looking at with this overall squad is just trying to find balance. And is bringing too many premiums in going to affect the overall balance of the squad? More than likely, yes. So I think that's one thing that I'm sort of uncertain about at the moment. But there is food for thought with this team, and those are just some of the transfers that I am looking at before the deadline comes on Friday. Okay, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you have enjoyed it, don't forget to drop a thumbs up and subscribe down below. We are getting ever closer to that game week 1 deadline. We're only a couple of days away now. Like I said, I won't be back with another video on my team until probably either Thursday evening, Friday morning, where I'll do a final team selection where you guys will see my exact team that I'm going to be going into game week 1 with. I will try and get an FPL challenge video out this week for you guys. Like I said on that one, I'm going to put a code on screen. I'm going to get a league started. So if anyone out there, if you're watching, you're playing FPL challenge this year, feel free to jump in. But yeah, we're getting ever closer to that deadline. It's getting crunch time now. Decisions will be made. A lot of people are going to be sort of umming and ahhing about different picks, but most important thing, go with what you feel. It's so easy nowadays to look at template teams, to look at other creators, to look at people on Twitter, whoever, and just sort of copy the community picks. Sometimes you just got to make a choice for yourself. Sometimes, like I said, for me with Havertz, you just get an inkling or a little feeling where you just want to go with it. And like I said, it may not work out, but I think the one thing you've always got to do is just trust in the team that you're picking. Put faith in the team that you're picking and the players that you're choosing. And I think, over the course of the season, you will see that they will return good. That's one thing that I always say in all the years I've been playing this game, is just have faith in your team and let them do their thing. You've picked them players for a reason, and don't let other people's teams or other people's selections put you off something that you may want to do. Because do you know what the thing is? If that player that you want to put in does return, you're going to feel it so much worse. Even if the other player that you brought in for that guy has returned, it's just so much better when it's someone that you've picked of your own accord. So that's my big message to all of you guys as we're coming into the final days before you're picking your team. Go with what you feel is right. Don't worry about what other people are doing. Don't worry about if this person's got Salah and Haaland, if someone's gone with none of them. Just go with how you feel, because at the end of the day, you've got to be happy with the team you're picking. So yeah, just a little bit of advice for anyone out there who's maybe new to this or struggling with decisions. Just go with your gut instincts. Go with the team that you feel is going to do you best. And like I said, just have faith in those players, and all good will come with it. So like I said, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you have enjoyed it, don't forget to drop a thumbs up and subscribe down below, and I'll catch you guys very soon.